December 1943. The California sun cut through the morning haze over Edwards Air Force Base, casting long shadows across the tarmac where Colonel James Hartford stood. His breath visible despite the mild winter temperature. He held a manila folder stamped with red letters. Top secret, SKID project. Inside were blueprints that would either revolutionize aerial warfare or become another expensive mistake buried in classified archives. They're calling it impossible. Sir? Major Robert Chen approached from the hangar, wiping grease from his hands. Chen had been with the project since its inception 3 months ago, when some brilliant engineer at North American Aviation had posed a simple question. What if the Mustang didn't need runways? Hartford didn't look up from the documents. Everything's impossible until someone does it. The Germans are innovating faster than we can respond. Our boys in the Aleutian Islands are operating from ice fields with supply lines stretched to breaking. We need aircraft that can deploy from anywhere. The concept was radical. Twin-engine P-51 Mustang variant, equipped with retractable landing skids instead of conventional wheels, reinforced fuselage to absorb the stress of beach landings and takeoffs from frozen terrain. Extra fuel capacity. The engineering challenges were staggering, but the strategic implications were enormous. Inside Hangar 7, the prototype sat under canvas tarps, partially assembled. Lead engineer Michael Russo stood on a metal scaffold, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, examining the port engine mounting. At 42, Russo was considered old for this kind of high-pressure development work, but his reputation preceded him. He'd worked on the original Mustang design, understood its soul in ways younger engineers couldn't grasp. The weight distribution is off, Russo called down to his assistant, Dorothy Kimball, who knelt beside the landing skid mechanism with a wrench. We add the second engine, reinforce the frame, install those skids, and we're pushing maximum structural tolerance. Dorothy stood, pushing dark hair from her face. She was one of only 3 women on the engineering team, recruited from Boeing after proving herself designing cargo door mechanisms. The skids retract clean. I've tested the hydraulics 40 times. The issue isn't the mechanism, Michael. It's the pilot interface. The transition from conventional landing to skid landing requires split-second timing. Then we need a pilot who can handle split-second timing. Hartford's voice echoed through the hangar as he entered with Chen. Which is why I brought someone special. Behind them walked Captain Sarah Vance, flight suit crisp, leather jacket bearing the patches of someone who'd seen real combat. She was 26, with steady eyes that assessed the prototype with professional detachment. Russo had heard the stories. Vance had flown P-40s in North Africa, survived being shot down twice, and had more combat hours than most pilots twice her age. Captain Vance. Hartford made introductions. Michael Russo, lead engineer. Dorothy Kimball, skid mechanism specialist. Major Chen handles military liaison. Vance nodded to each. I read the briefing on the flight out. Twin-engine Mustang with landing skids. You're asking me to test an aircraft that breaks every conventional flying rule. That's exactly what we're asking, Hartford said. We need someone who understands both the aircraft and combat conditions. Someone who won't panic when things go wrong. When, not if. Vance allowed a slight smile. Russo climbed down from the scaffold. The prototype isn't ready. We have structural concerns, engine synchronization issues, and the skid deployment system needs refinement. Realistically, we're looking at 6 weeks minimum before first test flight. We don't have 6 weeks. Hartford opened his folder, spreading reconnaissance photographs across a work table. Naval intelligence reports increased Japanese activity in the Aleutians. Our bases are isolated, vulnerable. We're operating P-40s from makeshift ice runways that turn to slush when the weather changes. Half our sorties never get airborne because the runways are compromised. Meanwhile, we're losing ground in the Pacific because we can't establish forward positions without extensive runway construction. He tapped a photograph showing a beach somewhere in the Pacific. Island hopping requires air superiority, but building runways on coral atolls takes weeks, involves thousands of Seabees, and makes us sitting ducks for Japanese bombers. If we had aircraft that could operate from beaches, from ice fields, from anywhere with 200 feet of reasonably flat surface, we change the entire strategic equation. Dorothy studied the photographs. The Japanese are developing similar capabilities. I saw classified reports about their experiments with ski-equipped Zeros. Which is why this isn't just about innovation, Chen added. It's about survival. We're in a technological arms race, and right now we're behind. Vance walked around the prototype, running her hand along the exposed airframe. The twin-engine configuration worries me. The P-51's strength is its agility. Add weight, change the center of gravity, and you risk creating something that flies like a pregnant cow. Russo appreciated her directness. The second engine isn't just about redundancy. It provides the power needed for steeper takeoff angles and the thrust to overcome the increased drag from the skid system. We've calculated everything. On paper, it works. On paper, a lot of things work, Vance said. I once saw a P-38 design that looked perfect on paper. Killed 3 test pilots before they figured out the tail design created unrecoverable flat spins. Which is why we need you, Hartford said. You understand what happens when theory meets reality at 300 miles per hour. The next 3 weeks became a blur of 18-hour days. Russo's team worked in shifts, assembling the prototype while simultaneously redesigning components that failed stress tests. The twin engines required custom mounting brackets. The skid mechanism needed reinforcement after hydraulic tests revealed weak points. Every solution created new problems. Dorothy barely left the hangar, sleeping on a cot in the office when exhaustion became overwhelming. Her husband was somewhere in Europe with the Third Army, letters arriving sporadically. Each one carefully worded to avoid discussing anything that might be censored. She worked on the skid mechanism with the same focus she applied to everything, testing and retesting until her hands ached. One night, around midnight, Russo found her in the machine shop, manually filing a metal component that the machinist had cut slightly wrong. Dorothy, go sleep. That can wait until morning. She didn't look up. No, it can't. We're behind schedule. Every day we delay is another day our pilots are dying because they can't get airborne from compromised runways. Russo pulled up a stool. Your husband. He's with Patton's army, right? Third Army, yes. Last letter I got. He was somewhere near the German border. He drives a supply truck. She paused in her filing. He wanted to be a pilot, actually. Failed the vision test, 20/25 in his left eye. So he drives trucks through minefields instead. This aircraft won't bring him home. No, but maybe it keeps someone else's husband alive. Maybe it shortens the war by a week, a month. Maybe that's enough. She resumed filing, metal shavings falling like snow. Russo understood. They all carried ghosts. His younger brother had died at Guadalcanal, killed in an air raid on Henderson Field while the runway was under repair. If they'd had aircraft that didn't need runways, maybe his brother would still be alive. Maybe a lot of men would still be alive. Vance spent her days studying the prototype, memorizing every specification, every system, every potential failure point. She flew conventional P-51s, pushing them to their limits, understanding how the aircraft responded at the edge of its performance envelope. She practiced emergency procedures until they became instinctual, knowing that when the test flight came, there would be no time for conscious thought. Chen coordinated with military brass, fighting for funding, for priority, for the resources they needed. Every defense project competed for attention, for money, for skilled workers. The Skid project was revolutionary, but revolution required believers, and believers were scarce among men who preferred proven technology to experimental gambles. Hartford managed the political landscape, attending meetings in Washington where men in suits questioned the project's viability. He showed them photographs from Alaska, from the Pacific, from every theater where runway dependence created vulnerability. He presented casualty figures, mission abort statistics, logistical nightmares. Slowly, reluctantly, the project gained traction. By late January 1944, the prototype was complete. It sat in Hangar 7, a strange hybrid that looked simultaneously familiar and alien. The twin engines gave it an aggressive, powerful appearance. The retracted skids created smooth lines that suggested speed. But everyone knew appearance meant nothing. The only test that mattered involved putting a human being in the cockpit and seeing if the aircraft killed them. The pre-flight briefing took place in a conference room that smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke. Weather reports covered the table, showing clear conditions for the next 6 hours. Hartford stood at the head of the table, looking older than his 50 years. This is a test flight, not a combat mission. Captain Vance, your objectives are simple. Get the aircraft airborne, assess flight characteristics, test the skid deployment system, and bring it back safely. No heroics, no pushing limits. We need data, not drama. Vance nodded, her face calm. She'd spent the previous night reviewing every emergency procedure, every contingency plan. Fear was natural, but she'd learned long ago that fear either paralyzed you or sharpened your focus. She chose focus. Russo went through the technical checklist one final time. Engine startup sequence is standard. You'll notice increased vibration from the twin-engine configuration, but that's normal. The skid deployment toggle is on your left panel, marked with red. Deploy only when you're below 50 feet and descending at less than 100 feet per minute. Deploy too early and the drag will stall you. Too late and you'll hit too hard. How hard is too hard? Vance asked. Hard enough to buckle the landing gear and possibly damage the airframe. The skids can absorb significant impact, but they're not magic. You need to kiss the ground, not punch it. Dorothy added, the hydraulic pressure gauge will show green when the skids are fully deployed and locked. Yellow means they're in transition. Red means hydraulic failure, in which case abort the skid landing and use the emergency belly landing procedure, which is basically crashing on purpose, Vance said dryly. Controlled crashing, Dorothy corrected. There's a difference. Chen handed Vance a sealed envelope. If something goes catastrophically wrong, this contains instructions for your family. I hope you never open it. Vance tucked it into her jacket without comment. Every test pilot carried such envelopes. Most never needed them. Some did. The walk to the aircraft felt longer than it was. Ground crew made final checks. Fuel topped off, control surfaces tested. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the desert air. In the distance, mountains rose against a pale blue sky, indifferent to human endeavors. Vance climbed into the cockpit, the familiar ritual of straps and switches grounding her. The instrument panel showed modifications, new gauges for the second engine, additional controls for the skid system. Everything was functional, mechanical, real. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing slowly, then opened them with renewed focus. Ground control, this is Skid 1, radio check. Skid 1, ground control reads you 5 by 5. You are clear for engine startup. The port engine coughed, caught, roared to life. The starboard followed seconds later. The twin engines created a symphony of power that vibrated through the airframe. Vance ran through the pre-flight checks, methodical and precise, confirming every system showed green. Ground control, Skid 1. All systems nominal. Requesting taxi clearance. Skid 1, you are clear to taxi to runway 27. Wind is light and variable. Good luck, Captain. The taxi felt different from conventional Mustangs. The added weight and modified center of gravity changed how the aircraft handled on the ground. Vance compensated, feeling the aircraft's personality through the control stick, learning its quirks. At the runway threshold, she paused, running final checks. Behind her in the observation tower, Russo, Dorothy, Hartford, and Chen watched through binoculars. The radio crackled. Skid 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed. Vance advanced the throttles smoothly. The twin engines roared, pushing the aircraft forward with surprising acceleration. The modified Mustang gathered speed quickly, the airframe responding beautifully. At 90 knots, she eased back on the stick, and the aircraft lifted cleanly into the California sky. Skid 1 is airborne, climbing to 5,000 feet. In the observation tower, Dorothy released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The first hurdle was cleared. The aircraft could fly. Vance took the prototype through basic maneuvers, testing responsiveness, checking control authority, feeling how the aircraft handled at different speeds and attitudes. The twin engines provided impressive power, but the added weight made the aircraft less nimble than standard Mustangs. It flew more like a light bomber than a fighter, stable but less agile. Control, Skid 1, flight characteristics are stable, reduced maneuverability compared to standard P-51, but within acceptable parameters. Beginning skid deployment test. She descended to 2,000 feet, circling the airfield, allowing the ground crew to observe. At 1,000 feet, she reduced speed, configured the aircraft for landing, then descended further. Skid 1 deploying landing skids in 3, 2, 1. She flipped the toggle switch. Hydraulic whine filled the cockpit as the skids extended from their recessed compartments. The pressure gauge flickered yellow, then stayed yellow. Control, I have a yellow hydraulic light. Skids are not fully deployed. Russo grabbed the radio microphone. Skid 1, cycle the system. Retract and redeploy. Vance followed the procedure. The skids retracted. The gauge showed green briefly, then back to yellow when she deployed again. Control, same result. Yellow light, partial deployment. In the tower, Dorothy's face went pale. It's the pressure valve. I tested it, I swear I tested it. The cold air at altitude must have affected the hydraulic fluid viscosity. Hartford remained calm. Captain Vance, abort the skid landing. Use conventional landing procedures. But Vance was studying the instruments, thinking. Control, the skids are partially deployed. If I retract them and land conventionally, I risk damaging the mechanism. If I attempt a skid landing with partial deployment, I might get lucky. Or you might crash and die, Chen said over the radio. Captain, orders are to abort. Vance circled, weighing options. Below, the runway stretched clear and safe. A conventional landing was guaranteed survival. But partial data was useless data. If they didn't understand why the skids weren't deploying, they'd spend weeks troubleshooting, delaying the project, potentially missing their window. Control. Requesting permission to attempt manual hydraulic override. Russo checked his notes frantically. There is no manual override. The system is fully automated. Then I'll create one. Vance rolled the aircraft, watching the skids position through her mirrors. If I increase descent rate and deploy simultaneously, the increased airflow might force the skids to full extension, or rip them off entirely, Hartford said. Captain, that's an order. Abort the skid landing. Long silence on the radio. Then, respectfully, sir, no. We need this data. I'm coming in. She descended rapidly, trading altitude for speed, then throttled back hard, bleeding energy. At 200 feet, she deployed the skids again. The gauge flickered yellow. She pushed the nose down steeper, increasing descent rate beyond recommended parameters. 150 feet, still yellow 100 feet. The gauge flickered 50 feet. Green light, skids locked, Vance called, pulling back on the stick to arrest her descent, flaring the aircraft just as the skids contacted the desert hardpan beside the runway. The impact wasn't gentle. The skids absorbed the shock, but the aircraft bounced once, twice, then settled, skidding across the hard ground in a spray of dust and stones. Vance fought the controls, keeping the aircraft straight as it decelerated. The skids performed exactly as designed, the aircraft sliding smoothly to a stop in less than 300 feet. Silence on the radio. Then Chen's voice shaky. Skid 1, are you intact? Vance shut down the engines, her hands trembling with adrenaline. Control, Skid 1 is intact. Aircraft is intact, and the skid system works perfectly, assuming you don't mind nearly dying to make it deploy. The debriefing lasted 4 hours. Hartford was furious about Vance disobeying orders. Dorothy was devastated about the hydraulic failure. Russo was both impressed by Vance's improvisation and horrified by the risk. Chen wanted to recommend Vance for both a medal and a court-martial. But beneath the arguments and recriminations, everyone recognized the truth. The concept worked. The aircraft could take off and land without runways. The skid system functioned. Yes, there were problems, serious problems, but they were solvable problems. Dorothy spent the next week redesigning the hydraulic system, incorporating heating elements to maintain fluid viscosity at altitude. Russo modified the deployment mechanism to be more aggressive, less dependent on perfect conditions. Vance trained with the new systems, practicing emergency procedures until they became second nature. By mid-February, they were ready for a second test. This time, Vance took the aircraft up in deteriorating weather, testing its capabilities under adverse conditions. Rain pelted the cockpit, visibility dropped, but the aircraft performed flawlessly. The skid landing on wet ground was rougher than on dry hardpan, but the system held. Third test, simulated combat maneuvers. Vance pushed the aircraft hard, diving, climbing, rolling, testing its limits. It couldn't dogfight like a standard Mustang, but it didn't need to. Its mission was different. Deliver firepower to forward positions, operate from impossible terrain, provide air support where conventional aircraft couldn't go. Fourth test, beach landing. They transported the prototype to a coastal facility where Vance landed on packed sand at low tide. The skids carved furrows in the beach, but the aircraft stopped safely. Takeoff from sand required more power, longer distance but remained feasible. Fifth test, ice field simulation. They couldn't get to Alaska. but they found a frozen lake in the Sierra Nevada. Vance landed on ice, the skids skittering slightly but maintaining control. The aircraft handled frozen terrain better than anyone expected. By March 1944, they had accumulated over 50 test flights. The prototype had proven itself repeatedly. Hartford compiled his reports, preparing his case for mass production. Chen coordinated with Pacific Command, identifying units that could utilize the new aircraft. Dorothy and Russo refined their designs, preparing detailed manufacturing specifications. But then the message came. Hartford read it twice, his face expressionless, before calling the team together. The project is cancelled. Silence. Vance, who'd risked her life repeatedly testing the aircraft, spoke first. Why? Hartford passed around the telegram. Strategic priorities have changed. The invasion of France is scheduled for June. All available resources are being diverted to support Operation Overlord. Additionally, the Joint Chiefs have concluded that the strategic value of skid-equipped aircraft doesn't justify the production costs and retooling requirements. That's insane, Dorothy said. We've proven the concept. We have test data showing it doesn't matter what we've proven. Wars are won by men who make decisions based on incomplete information and conflicting priorities. Right now, the priority is Europe, not Pacific Island hopping. The Seabees have gotten better at rapid runway construction. P-47 Thunderbolts are providing adequate ground support. The need for skid-equipped aircraft, while real, isn't pressing enough to divert resources. Russo stood slowly. So we're just done. Months of work, millions of dollars, innovative technology, and we just walk away? We archive the blueprints, classify the research, and move on to other projects. That's how it works. Hartford's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many good ideas die for bad reasons. For what it's worth, I think this aircraft could have saved lives. But I don't make those decisions. The hangar felt different after that. The prototype sat under tarps again, inert, transformed from revolutionary aircraft back into expensive aluminum. The team dispersed gradually. Chen returned to his regular duties. Dorothy transferred to a different project, designing cargo systems for C-47 transports. Russo took a position with Douglas Aircraft, working on conventional bomber designs. Vance requested combat assignment. Hartford, feeling guilty about how everything had ended, pulled strings to get her assigned to the European theater. She wanted to contribute where the war was actually being fought, not waste time on cancelled projects. The last time Russo saw the prototype was late April 1944. He'd returned to Edwards to collect personal effects, files that weren't classified. The hangar was mostly empty, the prototype scheduled for disassembly, its components to be recycled into other aircraft. He stood beside it one final time, running his hand along the fuselage, feeling the smooth metal that had never seen combat, never fulfilled its purpose. All that innovation, all that effort reduced to parts. Dorothy found him there. She'd come for the same reason, closure or nostalgia or simple stubbornness. I got a letter from my husband, she said. He's fine. Still driving trucks somewhere in France, preparing for the invasion. That's good. He asked what I'd been working on. I couldn't tell him, obviously, security. But I wanted to. I wanted to explain that I'd built something remarkable, something that could have made a difference. Maybe it still will, Russo said. These blueprints, this research, it doesn't disappear. Someday, someone might need skid-equipped aircraft. And all our work will be waiting? Someday isn't today. No, today we lost. They stood in silence, two engineers mourning a machine, which was really mourning possibility, potential. The might have been June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, supported by thousands of aircraft, launching from English airfields. The invasion succeeded at terrible cost, but succeeded nonetheless. The war in Europe turned decisively toward Allied victory. In the Pacific, island hopping continued. Seabees built runways on coral atolls, sometimes under fire, often in impossible conditions. Aircraft operated from these runways, supporting Marines and soldiers fighting their way across the Pacific. Men died when runways were compromised, when aircraft couldn't get airborne, when logistics failed. The skid project remained classified. The prototype was disassembled, its components dispersed. The blueprints were filed away, stamped top secret, stored in warehouses alongside thousands of other cancelled projects. might-have-beens and what-ifs. Vance flew P-51s over Germany, providing escort for bomber formations, engaging German fighters. She survived the war, accumulated more medals, and after Germany's surrender in May 1945, returned to test pilot duties. She never forgot the modified Mustang, the aircraft that had almost changed everything. Russo continued designing aircraft throughout the war and after. He became a respected figure in aerospace engineering, contributed to jet aircraft development, helped design aircraft that broke the sound barrier. But sometimes, late at night, reviewing blueprints, he remembered the twin-engine Mustang with landing skids and wondered what might have been. Dorothy's husband returned from Europe in 1945, alive, whole, lucky. They had 3 children, lived in California, and she continued working as an aerospace engineer for 30 more years. She never told her husband about the skid project, security restrictions remaining in force for decades. But she kept her own notes, personal records, drawings, just in case. Hartford retired from the Air Force in 1950, decorated, respected, carrying the weight of decisions made and not made. He wrote a memoir that carefully avoided mentioning classified projects, but in his private files, stored away for potential declassification, he included a detailed account of the skid project. His final note read, "Some innovations arrive too early. The world isn't ready, or circumstances don't align, or priorities shift. This doesn't diminish their value. History remembers what succeeded, but engineering advances through what almost succeeded." Chen returned to China after the war, hoping to help rebuild his ancestral homeland. The Civil War complicated everything, and he eventually emigrated to Taiwan, where he taught aeronautical engineering at National Taiwan University. He told his students stories, carefully avoiding classified details, about aircraft that could land anywhere, innovations that died in committee, the difference between what's possible and what's practical. Decades later, in the 1980s, documents began emerging from declassification. The skid project files surfaced, stamped with yellowed security markers, accompanied by grainy photographs of a strange twin-engine Mustang. Aviation historians studied the blueprints with fascination, recognizing how close the project had come to fruition. Articles appeared in specialized journals. The Forgotten Mustang, America's Lost Skid Landing Fighter. Documentaries included brief segments, accompanied by the few photographs that had survived. Aviation enthusiasts debated what might have happened if the project had been completed, if the aircraft had seen combat, if history had turned slightly different. But the people who'd built it, who'd risked their lives testing it, who'd believed in it, were mostly gone by then. Vance had passed away in 1979, of natural causes, surrounded by family. Her funeral included full military honors, recognition of her wartime service, but no mention of a cancelled project from 1944. Russo died in 1986, age 85, still sketching aircraft designs in notebooks even as his health failed. His family donated his papers to an aerospace museum, where researchers discovered detailed personal notes about the skid project, including emotional reflections on its cancellation. Dorothy lived until 1995, age 78. Her children, sorting through her effects, found carefully preserved drawings of landing skid mechanisms, annotated with notes and calculations. They donated everything to the Smithsonian, where it joined other artifacts of might-have-been history. Hartford's memoir was published posthumously in 1998. The skid project sections finally cleared for release. Readers discovered his frustration, his belief in the aircraft's potential, his acceptance that war involves impossible choices and limited resources. Chen's fate remained unclear. Family members believed he died in Taiwan sometime in the 1970s, but records were incomplete. His legacy lived through students he'd taught, engineers he'd inspired, stories he'd shared about innovation and persistence. The prototype itself no longer existed. Disassembled in 1944, its components had been recycled into other aircraft, probably P-51s that flew combat missions over Europe or Japan. The aluminum that had formed the revolutionary airframe became conventional fighters, serving their purpose in different configuration. But ideas persist beyond metal and machinery. The concept of skid-equipped aircraft resurfaced periodically. Proposals for STOL operations in Vietnam, discussions of rough field landing gear for special operations, experimental designs that echoed the skid project's innovations. Modern military historians studying the Pacific Campaign occasionally noted logistical challenges that might have been addressed by skid-equipped aircraft. Academic papers explored the counterfactual. What if the skid project had been completed? How might it have influenced island-hopping strategy? Could it have shortened the war, saved lives, changed history's trajectory? The answers remained speculative, trapped in the realm of what might have been, accessible only through imagination and careful analysis of limited documentation. The real legacy wasn't the aircraft itself, but what it represented. Human ingenuity responding to impossible challenges, engineers and pilots and military planners trying to innovate under pressure, the collaboration between different disciplines pursuing common purpose. The SKID project failed as a program, but succeeded as an example of how innovation works, how risks are taken, how creativity confronts reality. Somewhere in secure government archives, the original blueprints still exist, stored in acid-free folders, accessible to researchers with proper clearance. The drawings show a remarkable aircraft, twin-engine Mustang with retractable landing skids, designed to launch from beaches and ice fields, to operate where conventional aircraft couldn't go. The title on the folder reads, Project Savage Time, P-51 Variant Development, 1943-1944 cancelled. But cancellation doesn't mean forgotten. The people who built it remembered. The pilots who tested it remembered. And now, decades later, through declassified documents and historical research, others remember too. The aircraft never saw combat, never proved itself in the crucible of war. But it proved something equally important, that audacious ideas deserve pursuit, even knowing they might fail. Because innovation requires accepting risk, embracing possibility, and believing that tomorrow's impossible might become today's routine. The savage time of World War II demanded such innovation, such risk-taking, such belief. The SKID project answered that demand, even if its answer came too early, too expensively, too complicated for adoption. It remains a footnote in aviation history, a fascinating might-have-been, preserved in photographs and blueprints and fading memories. But footnotes matter. They remind us that history contains multitudes, that behind every successful program lie dozens of cancelled projects. That progress requires failures alongside triumphs. The twin-engine P-51 that never needed runways flew only in tests, only briefly, only in California. But it flew, and that perhaps is enough.